The Bane voice is even better if I use the hands.
Your punishment must be more severe.
It's pretty good on day 3 of day 3 of having the cold. It's good with or without the hands. What's on my mind today? Not much. I put together a little stitching for later. I mean, not much. Nothing's coming to mind right now. A lot of despair today. But I think I would like to write a poem about the dripping of the melting ice in the thawing month time, late March and early April, mid-March, actually. I just want to create in perfect alignment with the sun and the moon and the grass. To live an incantatory life, like on the steppe or on the open plains. You know, for all my fear about not being like 22 anymore, which, you know, when I was 22, I was like dating older than me by more than a little. And, well, not when I was 22. Well, when I was 19 and 20, I was. And also, like, you know, I didn't go to school. I didn't do any of those things. I didn't have that time. And it's another Saturnian irony that the sort of my cold notwithstanding, the attractiveness of my face, you know, finally kind of like everything looks like it's in the right place. And nothing's too big or small. Again, hair and unkemptness notwithstanding. That's all coming now at the end of my 20s. But the time you're supposed to sort of enact it in the free and youthful way that I want, because I don't want to be like George Clooney. So who cares? So a bunch of 40-year-olds want to hook up with you? Who wants that? Sorry, everyone who's 40, but I'm not, and I don't want to be. I surrender. But, you know, of course. I don't want to be that, and it's like now is the time when I am sort of the most attractive I've ever been, the most feeling like I should be in those scenarios, and you know, now I'm like too old to really not to be in them because I get along with all sorts of people. I had some girls the other day who were and this experience I had at this party was so fucking weird. Not so weird. It wasn't incomprehensibly weird. Anyway, it was with a younger girl. It was all positive, perfectly positive, more than positive. But it was still like, oh, that's what they mean when they say like, you're a kid, because you just do shit that makes no sense. And you know, I'm going like, what are you doing? You know, but I didn't. But I just don't have that brain anymore. But excuse me. I had these girls who were just telling me how much they like appreciated my kind of energy, which I've heard a lot. And also, same party where I got in trouble at the end, a little tiff with the host friends all night. And I credit this to my friend he was like, do this with your hair, wear this instead. All it takes is confidence. I was like, all right, I'll stop dressing like Bane, you know, and dress like I want to be wanted. And yeah, and everyone was just complimenting me all night. I was getting all sorts of positive attention, and then some kid that I didn't even know was like complimenting my character. He was like, "You're so nice," and it's like nice is, you know, people say things like I'm kind, which is not the same as being nice, you know, because they don't turn around and tell you something mean right to your face. But not excessively, I guess. That's just a way for me to warn people so I don't have to deal with too much combat, you know. That's like South Jersey growing up. That's what that is. You got to show everyone you have a weapon so that they don't try to make you into their target. Or that was my experience, apparently. Apparently other people had nice times. I didn't have a terrible time, but it wasn't peace, you know? Talk about intimidating.
And what is this?
I'll listen to the Bane, there's like a video of just every quote Bane says in the whole movie, and I'll just play it as ASMR, because it's such good bass. It's not soothing, but I think it's like an ADHD, like organizing. It's the real 432 hertz is Bane's voice. So I'll just listen to that. So I have all his quotes memorized from the whole movie, because I've listened to that video 25 times at least. Anyway, sorry, my point was, this kid told me, he was like, "You're really nice," and that's rare nowadays. I thought, I don't know if I think being genuine is rare, and I don't think that I'm disingenuous. I think that there's a large moat between my outer wall and my inner wall, and I have a pretty courteous and pro-social outer wall, and then there's an inner wall that's like nobody's getting through that moat, between the two walls. I'm almost done the history of Rome, so I'm thinking about the walls of Constantinople. Sorry, everybody, just watching me be gross, but c'est la guerre. So why am I talking about this? Because I would just like to make things in sequence with the seasons and the joy of life and rising and falling. I want to write the dripping of the rain in the thawing month. And I want to do all these things at the right place times for them, not retroactively or anywhere else. I want to just act and speak. I want to, now is the time, I'm realizing. Now is the time when I look good on screen, I look balanced, I'm young, but powerful. When I was younger, I didn't have the personal power to be the main character, I was building that up. And then also, but I'm not too old where I should be starting to settle, at least not me. I know a lot of people have different, I think each body, each biological soul, otherwise known as a body, has their own inner rhythm. And I don't mean that in a fruity way, like in a precious way. I mean that quite literally and precisely. There are universal transits. You can measure them with the planets. Saturn returns always the same time for everybody. Same season of life. But I also think that there are people, I seem to get a lot done with Mars. I learned this from speaking with Alexandra. Good luck I'm glad you're moved, by the way, and you're back home in California. I'll email you soon and see how that is. But she and I were talking about my Mars experiences together, and I'm always in the mountains when Mars is retrograde for some reason, or Mars is doing something, and it's like, well, retrogradation of the will, of the principle of action, of praxis. Well, I would retreat to the mountains and recalibrate, that makes sense. And I seem to also it's like the opposite of forthright, but I always find those experiences extremely meaningful, to be tucked away like that. So anyway, people have their inner rhythms. Your circadian rhythms might also follow a synodic cycle. That's the cycle of the planets moving around the sun at their own speeds. So the moon has a synodic cycle that's 28 days long. it is next to the sun every 28 days. Mercury's is pretty quick as well. It's always back and forth. That's why you hear about Mercury retrograde the most. But any planet that eventually passes through its connection with the sun and then continues around the rest of the solar system, that's its synodic cycle, right? So for Pluto, it will take a long time, 10 months or something, however long, because it's basically the sun catching up to Pluto. But for something like Venus, who moves quite quickly, it could be every few months because she's hovering around the sun. Okay, so that's what a synodic cycle is. But I think people's seasons of their lives may also correspond with the synodic cycles. Um, well, we're on a time bomb here. So, because I can't find a tissue. What I wanted to say was that I am now young enough to still be the youthful hero, but old enough to have the power on me and not be settled yet. It's not time for me to be settled. And I feel a little bit late to my own youth, maybe by 2 years or so. But I'm a Saturnian person. I did not necessarily have the gravitas 2 years ago. Where was I? I was coming back from Greece. I just don't think I was there. I didn't have it yet. I started to get it last year, and then I was too fat. So I gained a bunch of weight when Jupiter was in my home sign. No surprise. And first it was muscle and fat, but I was also like working. I was big, and then I just got so depressed. But I kept eating like I was bulking. Voila, you get really fat. Surprise. So now I've lost almost all that weight. I've probably lost 25 pounds, and now I'll just rebuild just the muscle with some lean bulk. Made that protein ramen today. But anyway, my point is, I want to be out on the step. I want to be able to live that life. And I feel like I've got like a 9, 12, 14 to 18 month window, 14 to 18 month window to be like, yo, I am the main character and we're doing this now. What happened to my phone? Buddy, come on. You're killing me with this. Like, I am the main character and we're making this happen now, You might see you might see a loot explosion come out of me in the next 18 months where I'm like, I get a lot of pictures on camera, a lot, saying a lot of things, making a lot of music, because I sort of feel like I'm in the period right now that they make the movie about, because the heroes go on and live and they have lives before the movie, but the period in the movie, it's like, what is that? This is the time that I hope that I'm in right now, and I hope that I can rise to meet it. Started watching The Sopranos today. Never seen it. I used to live in all the same towns. I know that the last scene is at an ice cream store. I used to live in that town. I've been by there many times. Sorry, I should do like an offensive coach, coordinator. Sorry, more syllables equals more important. It feels good to put things out there. I like this channel because it's lower stakes for me. It's still creative, but it's lower stakes. It's creative, but also it's me being seen. Even if it's no one's watching, I'm still being seen. And it's lower stakes than my music, which feels like it must be a text of the Bible, truly just kind of the truest, rawest, most pure thing that I can possibly rip out of my entire being. And this is just a bit more casual. There's more room for error or humanity here. And one other thing that's on my mind is so this is going to take a moment of contextual explanation. So I think there are two possible, not the only possible, but two different views of the development of history and culture that you could have, among other views, although I don't know what the other ones are. And one of them is sort of a materialist view, or a realpolitik view, and the other is a heroic individual view, so narrative. So there's realpolitik and there's narrative. And I think that there's a lot of subtlety and what I would call acknowledgement, which is meaning like, oh, you're different than me, you're having a different experience than me, and I'm acknowledging that. This is like comparative, so you understand like, well, there's a white version of being an American. Well, white, that's post World War II, but there's a Anglo-American, and then kind of after that, the Germans were pretty quickly included in mainstream white, although not as quickly as the Dutch, who were there, the whole time in New York. So it was like English, Dutch, then German, then like Irish were considered, subhuman compared to the English, right? But then it was like Irish, Polish, Italians, right? They all start to assimilate. There are lots of different versions of American history through those demographic groups, all starting at different times. Then obviously there were all the Africans that were taken, either kidnapped or sold as slaves, and then bought or kidnapped by the slavers, brought to here in the Caribbean and Brazil as well, but we're talking about here in the Caribbean. And that diaspora and all of the insane, like just insane in the sense of, imagine if you have 2,000 years of history and then all of a sudden somebody hits factory reset on your entire culture. And now you have this, with 2 or 3 generations of being on a plantation, you're separated from your spouse in these auctions. I mean, there's such a there's such a logic to it in some sense. Like if you're very ruthless, you just go like, well, yeah, we have to make sure there can't be any family ties. You can't, it's like divide and conquer from the microest to the macroest level, right? Like it's just pure conquering mentality. And it's very, I understand it strategically. I always am excited by like a plan that works, that's the hermetic part of my brain that just likes things to work, and likes to be good at them. But then you look at like what you're making work, right? Like I think of this, I think of the testing of samurai swords, of katana, and wakizashi, and they would test them by measuring how many body parts they could slice through without stopping, a single stroke. And that was like a whole thing. There were guys who were very good at, it's like exactly has to be placed here. Sometimes you do it through a pig. Sometimes you do it through bamboo. Sometimes you do it through criminals, right? So, like, that's a tool. It's a very good way to test if something is useful. But what you're doing is measuring how much a sword can kill before it's stopped by its own inertia. It's like, that's just so dark. But anyway, so there was such strategy to the annihilation and separation of, the human from their own soul and their own experience. And even that didn't work, right? So just talk about like the fucking power of the human spirit. So there's this insanely different African version of American experience, right? In different variations too, whether you're in the Caribbean or like, did your family go north into the cities? And then you kind of have like almost like an 80, 100-year jump start of starting to at least, people aren't hunting and selling you. Sometimes I know that happened, but you're not necessarily integrated. However, it's like there are manumission societies of different people. So that's all happening. And then later you have this experience where it's like the Grace Kelly, what's the actor's name from Rear Window? Jimmy Stewart. Madge, what do you know about San Francisco history? The the Grace Kelly, Jimmy Stewart, like American World, right? High society, not just for rich people, but just the culture of like a mainstream Americana. You know, it's so exciting. We all love it. Lana Del Rey loves it. We love it. Like, it's so cool. Rockabilly, Chuck Berry, who totally was in love with teenagers and then like invented rock and roll as a focus on teenagers. Just, I'm not here to persecute Chuck Berry. I love Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry to me is like, that's the fucking guy. Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly are the two guys for me for that early period. Chuck Berry's songs are so weird and impressive, like After School Sessions and Barry Is on Top are such cool fucking weird albums. He sings a whole song in like semi Caribbean patois with almost no guitar, just drums, and but it's about Cuba, you know. And there's an anti-army song, and then there's like three of the biggest rock and roll songs of all time are on that record. So I love Chuck Berry. However, he did, you know, go across state lines with the 14-year-old so they could get married, and then wrote a song about it, which is another banger. And I don't know, maybe they were in love. I truly don't know. I dated someone who was 9 years older than me when I was a teenager, and you know, I wasn't being used. We really cared about each other, or I cared about her. I didn't know how to handle that, but I cared, you know, as much as anyone can pass the, oh, oh wow. So it went a really long time this time without doing it. All right, I'm still trying to work this out with this phone. But anyway, yeah, anybody who can pass the, between that outer and that inner wall, that's not anyone else's fault. It's nobody's fault but mine. Right. So, okay, why am I talking about this? Because there's the Asian American, both Chinese and Japanese, and then more later Korean versions of the American experience. This is just America. There's the Mexican version, the Chicano version, the other Latinos version, the Cuban version, right? It's all flowing into this one thing. And so to understand like each other's historical experiences based on demographics or amount of money you have, like there are all sorts of demographics, right? Racial, ethnic, cultural. Racial and ethnic, I don't know what those are differently really. And also culture is so much more of the dominant force, I think, in an individual's expression than their race and ethnicity, which are real, but they're so entwined with culture. I was just thinking about that today. And if I ever feel like tension between me and another person, right, it's almost always cultural. Even if that culture is like, you know, your personality is the culture of your thoughts. So anyway, this is one version of like looking at a history, which is this, okay, I'm going to understand you, you're understanding me, and it's like a big kind of woven spaghetti bowl, or like a double stitched weave of netting or mesh or something. And that is the reason that I started by saying it's materialistic is because I think that it speaks to the reality of mass pressures on individuals, right? So that's one. That's almost like in the nurture or the environment, right? But then there's the or the fate. But then there's the free will, and this is like another view of history. And I kind of am like try to integrate these two things and ask like, the other version of history is narrative. It says like, I'm going to wake up into my life and live my individual hero's journey. And what I have noticed is that when that when that heartfulness gets too like mixed up in what I would call the more political or secular hologram of what I just described. So it's like you're looking at the environment, right? And you're like, okay, this story is true. That story is true. This story, like European and their various kind of threads. American history is true. African American history is true. Latino, you know, the mix of Spanish, indigenous South Americans, Central Americans. Like there's all those versions, right? All of that is true. So you have all this stuff, right? But it's I almost feel like if you if you put your hero's journey, your individual hero's journey, into any one of those contexts too much, it loses its solar fire. It loses the spark of humanity and essentialness, right? And I'm trying to figure out how to like, because I don't really care. Part of the reason why I'm a little bit checked out from like identity politics thinking, although I was first there, by the way, I part of the reason I have some wry scorn for a lot of what is contemporary discourse in every direction is because I'm like you guys are so fucking late to this to wake up to this. Like I remember Chappelle on SNL saying white people like newborn baby, and I'm just not just picking on white people. This is what he said, and I agree. He said, "White people like newborn babies. I can't trust the FBI. How am I gonna feed my family?" It's like they just woke up. It's like, yeah, dude, I've been on that shit since I was 7. Okay, I don't know why. I just had attention for it. So if you suddenly realize like the FBI is a completely psychotic, like corrupt institution from its inception, run by a raging homophobe who also was cross-dressing and persecuting women and murdered Fred Hampton. It's like that was the FBI guy for like 30 years. No, when did Hoover die? I think like 71, and he took the job after World War II, so maybe 30 years. First thing he did, ban all women from the department. It's like, whatever. Homogeneity does breed effectiveness, no matter what homogeneity you have, but it also breeds complete ossification, stultification, and then death. So you need a mix, right? It's just like that guy, truly on my short list of people to genuinely hate. Oh, by the way, one of his deputies was Tim Gunn's father. He used to try to beat the gayness out of Tim Gunn, like brutally, And then you see just what a dazzling sort of ascent phoenix story Tim Gunn has had. So, actually, he's a great example. Tim Gunn is gay. He's the co-host of Project Runway, or he used to be. I don't know. They're probably on season like 33 by now. So here's an example of someone who's like has a sort of political identity forced on them because they're non-normative, right? They don't match the status quo. But then they also have and then they are living in these really political times because he was growing up connected to this very corrupt political institution, the FBI, and during a very frightening time. I'm not sure how old Tim Gunn is, but like between McCarthyism, then the COINTELPRO era, it's like, it didn't stop being insane from like 1947 to today. So he's had all that. He had all that in his life, but then in his identity of who he is, which is called into more sharp relief because it's non-normative, right? So he's always explaining himself to other people, which is what all outsiders do. That's part of what being an outsider is. You get increased perspective, you get mobility between groups. Those are perks of being an outsider. And the distractions are that you're suspected of things, whether you do them or not, and you have to explain who you are to everybody all the time. We lost it again, but I'm going to keep just going through the blurs. Excuse me. So, however, in all of that very kind of like the undulating mellifluous water, right, where this story is true, that story is true, this story is true, like all these things are balanced, right? He has what I would call, I don't know too much about his life, but he has a very individual heroic journey, right? He comes through being beaten for who he is to a place of real prominence. He's very funny. He's had a lot of success. He seems like a kind man, from like what I have seen of him. He doesn't seem like he became embittered or corrupt, right? Which is not justifiable, but it is understandable in those situations, right? Which we all know. We know that we don't get to do something wrong just because we're hurt, but we still know that being hurt is gives you a lot of explanation of why you did something wrong. Like, they're not separate things. But how do I be an individual hero in a very relative world without being blind, but also without over this momentizing an eternal experience, the eternal experience of the soul of the individual expressing itself outward? I'm using the word hero's journey. That's Joseph Campbell's word and his synthesis of a lot of stuff. But it's also Aristotle's telos, the telos of the organism. And it's Nietzsche's will to power, too, which is like the most misquoted thing of all time because of his psychotic, evil, and backstabbing sister who reformatted his very anti-Semitic writing into propaganda for the Nazis, which he hated and told her many times that he hated her anti-Semitism. But anyway, the idea of the will to power is not domination. It's the power of something coming out of you, right? And so, like, that's an eternal thing because your soul has its telos. It has its free will, and it has, like in the Bhagavad Gita, it has that sense of, even if you know the script, you have to show up every day freshly to the shoot. How do I live that without being naive or blind to the legitimacy and relevancy of experiences, but also not over attach myself to any particular identity or anything like that? It's almost like I'm worried that to have the hero's journey, you have to be in the mainstream so that you can forget all of the like mass fate and circumstantial forces that you have to deal with. But maybe I just don't understand the hero's journey well enough, because another huge part of it is the restoration of the whole tribe, so to speak. So it could be that it's always political and I just am not framing it like that. Anyway, I'm not going to edit this down at all. Welcome to my insides. But, not out of spite, just out of tiredness. I'm not going to edit it down. I hope to be better soon. I'll throw up a little Bane video I did with the sick day voice, day 3 of sickness voice. And I think I'm going to put up Barbarian de Sevilla tomorrow. I talked with Vasilis today, got the master. I got the ISRC code. I just need to pick a cover photo. So, yeah, I want to act. I want to be somebody. Good night.